Okay. And we have 3.5 to 6 minutes today. Okay, whenever you're ready.
Okay. How comfortable do you feel about the topic of climate change? Well, in a world where there's engineering feats and technological advancements, it's kind of hard to think about that sometimes when the world is growing at a pace that's almost unmatched compared to human history. Well, as a citizen of not just the United States, but the world in general, I think it's a super important topic for everyone to know just the basics of climate change. You don't have to believe in it, but just the basics, just to know an understanding of what's going on. So today I wanted to talk about three things. What is climate change? What causes climate change? And what's being done today to combat climate change? So let's start with what is climate change. I think it's really important that people understand that they relate climate change and global warming. Global warming is basically the same, but climate change, there's more to it. Global warming is just referring to the warming of the earth, whereas climate change is everything that's happening. It's a little bit more. It's the extreme rainfall, the extreme heat, there's all the extremes and then some. So it's not just the heat, but it's everything. So as in the EPA says, climate is not defined by average temperature and precipitation. It is also the type, the frequency, the duration, the intensity, and like I said, the heat waves, the cold spells, the storms, the floods, and the droughts as well. So just put that in your mind, because climate change it's not just the greenhouse gases that people think of today. The extremes of climate change are what people really look at. So when you think of the world in today, people need to understand that climate change has been happening in all of the world's history. We've been through ice ages. We've been through, even when dinosaurs were alive, it was extreme temperatures back then. So one thing I think that people kind of don't realize is that it's been happening all the time, our whole lives, every bit of human history, it's been happening. But the important thing is noticing the frequency that it started to advance within the human history, specifically in the Industrial Revolution, kind of the start of there. And kind of like I said, since it has always been around, it's something that not too many people really looked into until the last couple of 50, 60 years. So as one of my resources said, the last 20 years have been a large amount of social science and research on climate change views. A term comprising of beliefs, attitudes, policy preferences, and behavioral intentions related towards climate change. So what I realized in some of my research is that climate change is honestly defined differently with every culture in every country. So it's almost like what the media is putting out there for you to read. And so then that kind of leads me into my next quote by a professor that said, scientists have been understanding climate change and how it's evolved in the last 150 years through a process of collective learning that relies on accumulation of observational learning. And that's because throughout human history, it's not like we've been taking temperature and this and that all the time. So it's basically what we've been able to see in the last 200 or so years. And so you have a basic understanding of what climate change is, a super basic, we'll say. Now let's look at what causes climate change, which I think is something that also is kind of interchangeable with what is climate change. But there's a multitude of factors that go into climate change. The EPA said that electricity generation is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the United States, next to transportation, which was kind of big for me to think about, because it's crazy to think that we're actually burning an immense amount of energy to create energy, which is almost like a revolving door, because there's a lot of stuff that goes into it. Because when you think about, some people think it's simple. Well, it's not that simple, because we burn, for half of our electricity use in the United States, we burn about 50% of that for using coal. So we're contributing. It's just tough. But so another thing that causes climate change is climate forcing. and that's just one of a multitude of things. But climate forcing, defined by the EPA, refers to the change in the Earth's energy balance, leading to either a warming or cooling effect over time. An increase in atmospheric concentrations of greenhouse gases produces a positive climate force, which is what we're seeing right now. The Earth, like I said before, it goes through its ups and downs, but right now we're seeing a positive climate force, which is a good and bad thing, because like I said before, our Earth needs it just to live, I guess. And one other thing about greenhouse gases is that it's not just, a lot of people think it's just CO2 emissions, but it's actually, the greenhouse gases are many things, whether it be methane, and I think there's one other chemical that's kind of hard to pronounce, but CO2 is actually not the biggest one, methane is. But realistically speaking, humans kind of determined that CO2 is what we're putting into the atmosphere that's actually hurting the Earth. It's not that we're putting an immense amount of methane and all that. But so now that we kind of have the basics of what climate change is and some of the factors that go into it, let's look at what's being done to combat climate change. In a time where so much is going on and so many, like I said, so many advancements are taking place, whether it be, the crazy super buildings or the mega structures of today's times, and that relies on so much energy to power it. So what I thought was super interesting was California is one of the biggest advancers in the United States for emission policies and a bunch of things for climate change. And in an article in the New York Times, the author went on to write about the administrator of the EPA, and he has said that he will not seek to revoke federal waiver that allows California to set auto emissions. And so what happened is when Trump came into office, he changed a couple of things in the Obama administration about how the EPA can handle emissions and this and that. But it actually comes down to local and state government. And so what happened is California is one of the biggest emitters of CO2 emissions in the United States. And they decided to actually regulate it for themselves rather than deregulate basically what was going on. So another thing that is being done is they're changing how they look into the cars. So every car that's released into the state of California, there is a panel of like car judges basically, and they look at the engines and they look at the emissions of every car before it's sold in the state of California. And then another thing that's being done more globally is that this year in 2017, France and Great Britain proposed to end the sale of new gasoline and diesel cars by the year 2040, which is a big deal when you think about those countries specifically do not have a huge amount of natural resources. So it's going to be a big deal for Great Britain since they don't have to import all these fossil fuels and this and that, because it is just a chain of islands that really does not have much for itself. And like I said before, there is a huge board of people that actually in the United States look at things like this. It was actually the board in California that got Volkswagen in trouble. I think it was a couple of years back. They said that their diesel engines were emitting a certain amount of parts per million CO2 emissions, but they actually lied about it. And the board in California is the people that caught Volkswagen for doing that. So now that we've seen some small things that are being done to slow climate change, we can review everything that I went over today. And I know it is a lot, but I think it is important for people to know a couple of little things. So the window in which we view climate change is different for every person. And I do believe that because, like I said, some people have a hard time accepting it. Some people don't think it exists. But I think it's important just to know that whether it is humans or not, or natural, like I said, because the Earth is always doing this, it is important to know it is happening at all times. And it just seems like for too many people, they just need to know a little bit more information just to have that talk. So hopefully with the information that I did go over today, if someone did decide to talk to you about climate change, you would be able to have at least a short conversation with them about whether it be what causes climate change, what is climate change, and what's being done today about climate change. Thank you. And sorry I said thank you. I just didn't know how to end it.
You remembered, huh?
Yeah, I know. I remember. Sometimes I just didn't know how to end that with an awkward pause.
Comes out. Okay, so either Tyler or David.
I don't care. You want to go or do you want me to go?
I'll go ahead if you don't mind.
Nope, go ahead.
All right. I also have a PowerPoint to share too.
Go ahead and share that.
Okay, let's see. At work?
Yeah, I'm going to pause our recording really quick. Go ahead.
All right. Americans love their beef. I mean, who doesn't love a juicy steak, a great hamburger? But have you ever wondered why one steak or one hamburger can be better than another? You may have thought it was the chef to blame, but it could have been the grade of beef used. So today I want to share with you the 3 most common types of grades, the characteristics and qualities of each grade, and also the cows they come from. So we better get moving in order to discuss all the material needed. So let's talk about the 3 most common types of grades first. The USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture, dictates what beef can be sold in grocery stores and also restaurants, and they also determine the grade of the beef as well. The 3 most common types of beef, from okay quality to the best quality, are as follows: select, choice, and prime. Now, being a chef for the past decade, I've only used prime in my restaurants just because it's the better quality, but that doesn't necessarily mean that select or choice are not as good quality either. Prime is just the better of the certain qualities. According to the USDA, Americans consume 78 pounds of beef per year, which is 16 pounds more than the national average of 60 pounds a year. So that's a lot of beef. So now that we've talked about the 3 most common types, let's talk about the different qualities and characteristics of them. As I stated before, the USDA graded beef prime is the best grade, but what makes the differences? It boils down to a few different things: the age of the cow and how well the cow was taken care of. But what do I mean, how well the cow was taken care of? This refers to how old the cow was and how much it was fed. In a recent study performed by NPR.org, to produce just a 16-ounce, a 1-pound prime steak, 20.1 pounds of feed, 158.4 gallons of water, and 223.5 square feet of grazing land is used. Now that's just for one steak, let alone the 52.2 billion pounds consumed by the U.S., according to an article from USA Today. In the culinary world, we judge our steaks by the marbling, which is the intermuscular fat, which gives the beef the juicy and great flavor of the meat when it's emulsified, when it's cooked. The prime age to butcher a cow is at the age between 28 to 34 months. The older the cow, the less marbling you're most likely going to have. So in this first picture you see, this is a select choice. You can see it's very red, not a lot of marbling, so it's very lean, which means, you know, it lacks some flavor and some of the juiciness. And the average age of the butchering for the cow is between 32 to 34 months old. The next picture you see is that of the choice grade. This is what most restaurants serve and to their customers. It has a little more marbling, a little more fat, so it's a little more juicier and flavorful, and the average age of butchering is between 28 and 30 months. The final picture you see is that of prime. This is what most white tablecloth restaurants serve. It has a higher fat content, which people crave. The meat's very tender, has a lot of flavor and a lot of juiciness. However, it also costs the most too. On average, ranging between $13 to $18 a pound on the market. These cows are butchered at the age between 26 and 28 months old, so quite young. So when most people think of the fat content, they tend to think the more fat, the chewier or tougher the meat will be. And however, that's not the case when we're talking about fat, or the marbling in that case. When beef is tough, it comes from the gristle, which is either a tendon or cartilage, not the fat, because the fat's emulsified and cooked down. So at this point, we've talked about the three most common types of beef grades. We talked about the qualities and characteristics. Now let's talk about where we get our beef from, what type of cows. There are many different breeds of cows. However, there's only two that are most prominent in the U.S. The first breed being Black Angus, which is most known as Angus. These cows are better known for their higher fat content, which makes them prime candidates for the choice of prime grade and choice grade. According to the cattlemen's, the National Board of Cattlemen, Angus have a very low birthing rate problem, which means they're great money makers. You know, they don't have a lot of lost cattle in that way. The second most used cow is that of Herefords. Herefords are known for their efficiency to convert grazing land into excellent beef. However, they're just killed later on in their life compared to that of Angus, making it more of a select grade meat. So now at this point, we've discussed the three different types of grades. We talked about their qualities and characteristics, and we also talked about the most common cows they come from. So in conclusion, you now know why some steaks can be better than others and taste differently. This also explains why meat can be priced so outrageously. So the next time you're shopping at the grocery store, your local grocery store, or you're going out to dinner, look or ask someone what grade of meat is being used, and that can help you determine whether you should get the steak or maybe just stick to a salad.
Awesome. My dad always tells me that. He's like, the reddest ones are not the best ones.
Yeah, that's right.
I got it, Dad.
Are you from Cody?
Am I
What's that?
Bree?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I know who your dad is. I used to live in Cody.
Oh, you did? Yeah, his billboards are everywhere.
Yes, exactly.
I was embarrassed by it when I was little. Now I don't care. Okay. All right. So who else has not done their self-critique yet?
I guess it's me.
Okay.
All right. Let's see.
I'm ready, David.
Okay. Am I? Okay. All right. Virtual reality. We've all most likely seen a movie where a person dons a headpiece or is plugged into a computer and is whisked off to another world. Well, the truth of the matter is what you've seen on the big screen has been exaggerated the technology vastly. Until now. We are now in an age where computing power has made virtual reality, well, a reality. Today, I would like to share with you a brief history of the technology and a short story from my first personal experience with the technology, and let you know about the devices currently available to you to bring home and join the world of VR. Let's start with a little history. This information was gathered from the virtualrealitysociety.org. In the mid-1950s, cinematographer Morton Hellig developed the Sensorama, which is an arcade theater-style cabinet in which you leaned into and it would stimulate all the senses, not just sight and sound. It featured stereo speakers, a stereographic 3D display, fans, smell generators, and a vibrating chair. Fast forward a few more years, 1960s. Mr. Hellig continued his research into the 3D or the virtual reality world, created the first head-mounted display, the Telesphere Mask. The headset provided stereoscopic 3D, and it also included stereo sound. Well, let's fast forward a little further, 1987. Even after all this development in virtual reality, there wasn't a technical term to describe the technology. That all changed in 87 when Jaron Lanier, founder of the Visual Programming Lab, coined the term virtual reality. From there, the label has stuck. Let's fast forward a little further, 1995. I was 15 years old. Yes, I'm that old. It was my first, I was on vacation with my best friend. We were in Phoenix, Arizona. It was a hot July day, about 115 degrees. So it was a mall day. In this mall, they had a little shop with tethered together virtual reality machines. They were these big round circle things that you went and stood at. So you didn't have a lot of motion. But you put your headset on, and I looked to my right, and there was my best friend in digital form. And it was the coolest thing ever, because at the time in 1995, the 3D technology, as far as the graphics we have today in computers, wasn't quite there. It was mostly side-scrolling, 2D kind of format. Well, it was $5 a pop for 10 minutes. We probably spent, I don't know, $40, which was about most of our money for the vacation, just playing video games, as dumb kids would do. However, the technology was in its infancy, and just to let you know, one of the machines was $65,000. And if you want to look at terms of 1995 money, that was about the cost of a house. So let's fast forward a little further. This information is from PC Magazine. This is the technology that's available for you today. The first is the Oculus Rift. I don't know if many of you have heard it, but it was basically started the stride for the VR in home. Its cost is $399 MSRP. It comes with 2 motion sensing controllers. It also uses infrared LEDs to track your movement. However, the technology requires a relatively high-end PC to operate. Option 2. Actually, it is the flagship of the VR world. It's the HTC Vive. Its advantages, its MSRP is $599, but it does include a game. Its advantages is it uses 2 towers in your room and over 70 LED sensors to track your movement for a whole room movement. But once again, it requires a relatively high-end PC to run. The third option is the PlayStation 4 VR. It is a little cheaper. Well, it's still $399 for the device, but you don't require a high-end PC. It will operate with a PS4 or a PS4 Pro, which I recommend as it's a more powerful system. It also comes with a multitude of controllers. You have dual controllers that are motion sensing, just like the other 2. You can also use the standard DualShock controller of a PlayStation, which I'm sure you've all seen. Or they also have the new Move control or aim controller, which is great for first-person shooters. So while I've covered a little history of the VR device, I've shared a story of my first experience with the technology over 20 years ago. Now you know the devices that are available for you to bring home. Like Judy Vance and Leif Berg said in the article, Industry Use of Virtual Reality in Product Design and Manufacturing. Virtual reality is here. It works. So now you must ask yourself, are you ready to get under the hood?
All right. Okay, so those are all of our self-critiques, yeah? Everyone else has done theirs?
Yeah.
Perfect.